armed like paramilitary SWAT teams to take land from Americans who have worked it for generations. In towns and cities across the nation, homeowners suddenly face jail for cutting trees down on their own property. We now call the trees in your backyard the urban forest. And government now values those trees more than the infrastructure of your community, more than the sewers and the roads, more than the office buildings which house commerce, more than your home which protects your family. Under these new rules, cutting down a tree diminishes the value of the community. That's why homeowners are forced to give up major portions of their property for bike trails and open space to be used by people they don't even know. No trespassing, private property are ideas from a bygone era. Government can do as it wishes on or to your property. All of these policies stem from the revolution called sustainable development. Ignore sustainable development at the peril of everything you hold dear: individual liberty, private property, free enterprise, free travel, free association, even life itself. Driving the implementation of sustainable development in the United States are two separate action plans. The first is the Wildlands Project. The Wildlands Project is the most radical, outrageous idea ever conceived by grown men and women. It is the whining rant of spoiled brats who just want to have it their way. They don't like our free society, so they have conceived of a plan to make it disappear. The Wildlands Project calls for the rewilding of 50% of all the land in every state, restoring everything back to the way it was before Christopher Columbus stepped foot on this continent. In other words, the elimination of human presence on over 50% of the American landscape. It was conceived in the minds of eco-thugs like Dave Foreman, the maniac who founded Earth First. In the Wildlands Project documents, Foreman says, quote, "We live to see the day when grizzlies in Mexico have an unbroken connection to grizzlies in Alaska, when gray wolf populations are continuous from New Mexico to Greenland, when vast unbroken forests and flowing plains again thrive and support pre-Columbian populations of plants and animals," end quote. In such a vision, there is little room for people. Earth First went on to say, ask this question: does all this mean that the Wildlands Project advocates the end of industrial civilization? Most assuredly, end quote. And followers of Foreman's ideas now burn down housing construction sites, destroy heavy equipment owned by timber companies, and set fire to Hummer dealerships. The ballot box apparently is too slow for implementation of their agenda. Reed Noss, one of the authors of the Wildlands Project and later a policy expert of the Clinton Department of Interior, said, quote, "The native ecosystems and the collective needs of non-humans species must take precedence over the needs and desires of humans." The project became a threat to you and me and the rest of the world when the Wildlands Project, the blueprint for it, was included in the UN's Biodiversity Treaty and was ratified at the UN's 1992 Earth Summit. In other words, the Wildlands Project quickly grew from the ravings of lunatics to international policy. And of course, that wasn't an accident. The eco-thugs have a direct link to the UN. As recognized non-governmental organizations, they actually help write the policies. Much of the Biodiversity Treaty was implemented by the Clinton administration through executive order, even though it was never officially ratified by the Senate, thanks to Michael Kaufman. It's now official U.S. government policy. Now, the second path of implementing sustainable development is smart growth, as Michael talked about. This is a plan to herd all of us into specific human habitat areas, out of the suburbs and our beautiful yards, and into crowded cities and high-rises. The entire plan was introduced at the 1996 UN Habitat 2 Summit in Istanbul, and in the back of the room I've got an original document, a draft copy of what our own agency, Housing and Urban Development, presented at HUD presented at the Istanbul conference. That plan calls for the downsizing of cities and towns into new urban clusters where workplaces, housing, and nature are blended together. Homes and communities set up in specific human habitat areas will be crowded, multifamily, low-rise residential areas with running and walking paths instead of cars. Transportation will be primarily light rail trains and bicycles, as you've heard. As one smart growth activist gleefully said, quote, "It will be the humans in cages with the animals looking in." Under the Sustainable Development banner, the battle to diminish the liberty that our founding fathers provided is accelerating. You know, America is different from any nation on earth. We are wealthy beyond the comprehension of any society before us. We are strong, powerful, and healthy. For 200 years, we have prospered because we have operated under a rule of law that was designed to protect the individual's right to pursue his own life in the way he chooses, to work, to play, to invest, and to own property, and use it in a way that best suits our needs. The government, by edict of the Constitution, has the responsibility to protect such activities. This nation is the only one in the history of the world in which the founding fathers set out to find a style of government that would guarantee protection of individual rights and property rights. Nearly every other nation began as a dictatorship or the subject of a king. Most nations of the world still operate that way. The property in those nations began as the personal property of the king or the government. Those who were granted ownership occupied it at the pleasure of the government and at the peril of losing it back to that same power whenever it wanted the land. Not so in the United States of America. In this nation, from the very beginning, private ownership of the land was undertaken as a right of the people. Government's job was to make sure that no one could unjustly take that land, or control how it was used, or trespass over it against the owner's will. Such a form of government is not a democracy. Democracy, the idea that the majority rules, can be a lynch mob crying for action against an individual it has deemed guilty. If the law says we must first try him, the lynch mob cries, "We can't wait for the slow wheels of justice to turn. Somebody must do something now." Democracy is three wolves and a sheep voting on what to have for lunch. And the democracy is the word most used to describe the implementation of sustainable development. Our way of government is a republic. In a republic, even if the majority dislikes how a property owner uses the land, the government protects his right to do so, so long as he's not infringing on the same rights of others. Too bad if he's got 4 cars parked in the driveway, one of them's on jacks, or decides to paint the house purple with a green door. The land is his. It's bought and paid for. The founding fathers, particularly James Madison, took these ideas to heart and put them in the Constitution, particularly in the Fifth Amendment. It limits government taking of private property, saying no American shall, quote, "be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation." This is a guarantee to Americans that they are safe and free to pursue their own lives without interference of government. In fact, it says the government's job